We talk about the Ravens parting with defensive coordinator Don Martindale next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We returned here another week of Ravens football, and boy, do we have some news to talk about. Now, we don't put out content on Saturdays or Sundays here on Locked On Ravens, so when the Ravens dropped their bombshell news on Friday afternoon after we would put out Friday's podcast, I've had a lot of time to sit and think about this Don Martindale news. Now, obviously, the big news, the Ravens parting ways with defensive coordinator Don Martindale after 4 seasons. He took over the job in 2018 after Dean Pease, who retired, and then Pease has been known as like the Brett Favre of the NFL. He's retired, then unretired, then unretired, then unretired, and so that's where he's at. But it's really the end of an era for the Ravens, as Martindale was a very good defensive coordinator for them, and we'll talk about, of course, my initial thoughts and everything on the move, and a move that really now starts a search for the Ravens in a key pivotal time for their organization. And we'll dive into everything relating to that as well, not only today and not only throughout the rest of the week, but throughout the rest of the offseason as they go through their process. So here in the first segment, I just want to talk about my initial thoughts first, right as the move went down. And then as I've had a couple of days now to think about it and kind of go through things. In the second segment, I want to get into kind of the why factor, because it's an interesting debate or dilemma, whatever you want to call it, about should the Ravens have kept Don Martindale? Should the Ravens have not parted ways? So we'll talk about kind of the why this happened in the second segment. And then in the final segment, we'll talk a bit about some both internal and external candidates for the position. Now, side note, the Ravens historically have hired internally for their coordinator positions. It's been pretty rare that they hire externally, but regardless, we'll talk about some internal guys, some external guys as well. Before we do that, though, and dive into all the content, I want to thank everybody so much for supporting me, through this journey as a Locked On Ravens host. I'm excited to continue covering this team and continue putting out daily content 5 days a week, both audio form and video form. Video form's been amazing. The growth has been absolutely amazing, and I want to thank everybody who's already subscribed. I greatly appreciate it. It does not go unnoticed. Our first goal here is 1,000 subscribers, so if you have not subscribed already, I greatly implore you and encourage you to do so. It will greatly help out, and I appreciate it. So thank you for those who have subscribed, and for those who haven't, thank you for your future subscription. Also, be sure, if you're here with us in audio form, to turn notifications on. I don't forget about the audio listeners. We started in audio form 2.5 years ago here, at least my tenure here on this show. So it's been amazing. Audio listeners, video listeners, thank you. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstrecker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into this Don Martindale discussion. Here we'll talk about my initial thoughts of just what the move was. And honestly, so here's a mini story. I was sitting scrolling through Twitter, and I refreshed my feed. It was like a random time. I forget what time the announcement came out, but I literally, swiped up, refreshed my feed, and the announcement was the first thing. It was like literally 1 second ago. And I read it once, and I'm like, is this real? I thought it wasn't real at first. And then I look, and it's the Ravens verified account, and I'm like, oh no, this just happened. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh my. Like, no way. I was shocked at the timing of it. Now, I know a lot of people were also shocked at it as well. This wasn't something that I was expecting at the time that it happened. The Ravens obviously went through their end of season discussions. They've done all of their due diligence of just where they want this team to go, what their plans are for this offseason. And we'll kind of get more into this in the why factor in the second segment, but it just seemed like the time was right for both the Ravens and for Martindale. And it just was like a lot of people were saying, wrong coordinator. This isn't Greg Roman. And part of the reason why I've been vocal about the fact that I didn't expect the Ravens to move on from either of their coordinators, even though there were reasons that you could make to fire Greg Roman or to fire Don Martindale, I thought the number one reason why both would stay, at least in the some portion of 2022, is because of the injuries. Greg Roman, there are a lot of flaws, but he's a good offensive coordinator. But we don't know what he's like with a fully healthy Ravens offense that we were supposed to see in 2021. There was no J.K. Dobbins, no Gus Edwards. Ronnie Stanley only played for a game. Lamar Jackson was out for a month, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, for Don Martindale and his defense, it was Marcus Peters goes down. They lose Marlon Humphrey. They lose Deshaun Elliott. They don't have Derek Wolfe or LJ Fort, and they're losing corners left and right, and guys are missing months and weeks. And so I kind of thought that with the track record and success that Don Martindale had over his 4 years as a coordinator, I maybe thought that it would have been fine, right? Like, I have been on this show before talking about how the Ravens need more sacks. And I have every single year, I've only been here for 2.5, but every year it's been more of me saying, I don't think it's a talent issue anymore. I think it's a scheme issue. And I think the Ravens started to see the same thing. And, they want to generate more pressure with 4. And again, this is more of the why thing. But it was a shock to me because I didn't expect them to move on because of those injuries. And I thought that with getting Marcus Peters back and assuming he stays and everything and retooling the defense a little bit, that with the top defenses that Martindale has had with his unique blitz packages and what he's been able to do, I thought that he was going to stay for at least another year. And then after that, when his contract expired, you look at it and you say, all right, did we get the improvements we wanted? Did the issues with sacks go away, for example? That's where I thought it was going to be. So it didn't necessarily shock me that the move happened. It shocked me of the timing of the move. And it just was, it was out of the blue for me. I was just sitting there on a Friday afternoon being like, all right, it is the weekend now. And then it was, okay, we're in big news mode right now. And, Marcus Peters takes to Twitter. He's like, calls Don Martindale a real one. Marcus Peters rarely takes to Twitter. He was somebody who was loved within the organization. John Harbaugh, in the statement that the Ravens put out, talked about how he values that relationship with Don Martindale. And Martindale will be missed. I mean, some of the stuff that Don Martindale does, really, it's just really, really good football. He's a brilliant football mind. The Ravens will miss what Don Martindale brings, but I also think that they needed to figure stuff out, whether that was with Martindale at the helm or whether they needed somebody completely new in there. They took the second route. That's what they felt was the most not comfortable option, but the option for their team. And what this tells me, this is something I want to talk about for our first break. It tells me that they're not complacent. That's a big thing for me. I have been preaching growth for many, many months, many, many years for this team. They've done great in that department. 2021, I kind of throw it out a little bit, right? You're supposed to grow every season. Injuries put a clear cap on this team's ceiling, and fully healthy, there's potential they could have been the AFC Championship game right now, instead of a Cincinnati or a Kansas City. By the way, that might have been the best divisional round we've ever seen. There are a few that live up to it, but what a weekend of football. But that aside, the Ravens, with this move, kind of says that, yeah, you know what? There are some things that we have to improve, and that's where they're going right now. The Ravens said to themselves, we have to improve in X. We have to improve in Y. And they didn't think that Martindale was going to ultimately be the guy to take them to that next level, or that Martindale was going to make the necessary adjustments. And here we are now talking about the Ravens having to go out there and get a new defensive coordinator for a team that, for a lot of the year struggled, actually for the whole year, struggled from a pass defense perspective. They were the worst in the NFL in many categories. They were bottom 5 in a lot more, but the rush defense was number 1 in top 5 in a lot of categories there. They rallied, I think, in the second half of the season. There were issues, right? There were issues with tackling in the first half, issues with big plays, communication. I feel like they tidied that up for the most part, right? There were still some issues with that in the second half of the season, but really outside of the Cincinnati game in week 16, you go back to the week 10 against Miami game, I thought they played relatively good defense, all things considered. They shut down a lot of the stuff. The issue was the finishing. The Ravens could not finish a game. We've talked about it with Spencer Schultz. We've talked about it with Kadri Ismail. They could not finish games, and that was the defense's undoing. They were in situations to win, But whether you want to talk about that Miami game, whether you want to talk about the Los Angeles Rams game, whether you want to talk about a couple other games where the defense was in position to make a stop, to get a turnover, to do whatnot, they couldn't do it. And so I think that was part of the reason why. There are a lot of other reasons why, but my initial reaction was kind of shocked, all things considered. And as I've kind of had time to think about it over these last couple of days, I understand where it's coming from. The team wants to get better. Don Martindale did a lot of great things with this organization, but at the end of the day, the two sides part ways, and the Ravens will be looking for their new defensive coordinator. We'll head into our first break. When we get back, we'll be diving into the whole why factor of the move. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. If you want to eat healthy but it gets boring, Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate, and they contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that tastes good and is good for you. That way, when you enjoy a delicious Built Bar, you can almost always count it as a workout. And there are so many flavors to choose from. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We return our second segment of this Monday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, talking about a pretty big bombshell of news that the Ravens dropped on Friday afternoon. The Ravens parting ways with defensive coordinator Don Martindale. Now, we talked about my initial reactions in that first segment and just where I was initially and where I am now. But there are, I think, a lot of reasons why, and this is going to be more stat-centric, where I'm going to throw some stats out there just for reference to talk about. And, you know, there are a couple reasons now. There have been people like Albert Breer and a couple others who have put information out there based off what they have heard from their sources about why this was a thing, a little more insight from a different point of view. And so Albert Breer, you know, we can talk about what he said. Albert Breer pretty much said that there was philosophical differences, where what I'm assuming that means is the Ravens and Don Martindale had a conversation, and they said, we need to do this, this, and this. We need you to change this, this, and this. And Don Martindale probably said, I don't want to change that. You know, it works. We've had success with it. And the Ravens probably said, no, we need to do this, this, and this. And Don Martindale was probably very firm on his stance. And that's his right. You know, he's allowed to do that. And so that's where it's, again, that's my guesswork, but that's what I'm assuming kind of went down. Maybe not exactly, but the Ravens, there were some, and I didn't even realize this, there were some hints below the surface. I forget what game it was, but there was a quote from John Harbaugh after a game they lost late in the season. It might have been Green Bay. I can't remember what the game was, but there was a quote, and a reporter asked John Harbaugh a question about just what happened. And Harbaugh pretty much said, they got us on cover zero. If you go to the well too many times, they'll make you pay for it. You know, that's a paraphrase, not an exact quote, but pretty much he said stuff along those lines. And so maybe that was like the beginning of the end, where, you know, blitzing has been a key part of what Don Martindale has done from a defensive perspective for his entire career as Baltimore's defensive coordinator. He has been very aggressive in those situations. The Ravens team as a whole was aggressive in 2021. This wasn't just Martindale, right? The Ravens went for two on multiple occasions. Now, it didn't work out for them, but they went for two in key situations where they didn't necessarily have to. They wanted to go for the wins. Don Martindale wanted to go for the big sacks, the big plays on the blitzes. Going back to week one, we saw that. And I've talked about this before, where Don Martindale was continue. It was just every play in the fourth quarter and overtime. Blitz, 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 blitz. And a lot of cover zero stuff. And the Raiders tore it apart in Las Vegas. So it kind of starts there. And we have seen the questionable, I'd say, play calling decision makers of this organization. I mean, we've talked about Greg Roman so many times on this show about that, where yes, there are key situations where Greg Roman just calls the wrong thing. Don Martindale, for example, one play that sticks out is week 11 against Chicago, where it's that fourth down play. He leaves Chris Westry on an island, and the Bears burn him for a touchdown. You know, Andy Dalton, the double move, it just worked. So the Ravens, they, I think, wanted somewhat of a scheme switch or a scheme adjustment, and it just wasn't going to happen with Martindale's philosophies, where They want to generate more pressure with 4. They want to scheme up more pressure. I have, ever since I took over the show, I have been talking about how the Ravens are a high pressure, low sack team. You can go back to episodes I've done. High pressure, low sack. That's what I have preached a lot on the show. It is what the Ravens defense has been. We have seen the Ravens have Terrell Suggs, Matthew Judon, Zadarius Smith all on the same roster and have relatively good success. You know, that 2018 season, none of them had over 10 sacks, but they were right around the 7, 8, 9 sack range. But then you see Zadarius Smith leave and turn into one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. You see Matthew Judon leave and turn into one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So what started off for me as a maybe it's both talent and scheme, like it's 50-50, all of a sudden at the end of this year turned into, oh, wow, maybe this is like 80% scheme or like 90% scheme. Because let's not forget, the Ravens brought in Calais Campbell to be like this huge interior pass rush guy who had success doing that in Arizona and in Jacksonville. And he just couldn't get sacks. Like he had the 3 sack game against the Eagles in 2020. And then really we didn't see a ton of impact from him as a pass rusher. Derek Wolfe, who had been a great interior pass rusher, he didn't play in 2021. He only had 1 sack in 2020. And you see guys, it's just like the games where they have no sacks. It's consistent stretches of weeks or months where they will have no sacks or 1 sack or 2 sacks every game. And then once every 2 months, they'll have that like 5 or 8 sack performance that will be like, oh, okay, it's okay. And everything's good and we can move on. But then it just goes back to what it was. Yannick Ngakoue, Yannick Ngakoue is a clear example of this, where Ngakoue, extreme success in Jacksonville, extreme success in Minnesota, comes to Baltimore and it's just used the wrong way. I mean, straight up, he was used the wrong way. It was a horrible scheme fit. And the Ravens were clearly expecting more. And Ngakoue was clearly expecting more. But he goes to Las Vegas and has a great year. So it's those types of things where it's not like it's happening once. It's not like it's happening 2 times. This is a multiple player thing where the guys coming into Baltimore can't get consistent sacks. The guys going out of Baltimore can. So I think that's where some of the frustrations might have lied, within the Ravens organization. And they're saying, look, we need to get better at this. We have to scheme up pressure, because a clear thing in the NFL and at the NFL level is the more the quarterback holds the ball, the less likely it is the secondary can cover. And that's obvious, right? Duh. But, if you have quarterbacks consistently holding the ball for 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, that timer keeps going up, that's not great. And the more you have to blitz to get that pressure, the less guys you have back there. You can't put safety help over the top. You can't put a guy into a zone that you want. It's those types of things where I think the Ravens just wanted to get to a different scheme fit there. Now, looking at the actual blitz percentages for Don Martindale and his ranks in the NFL, Don Martindale had the number 1 blitzing defense in 2018 in terms of actual percentage. So, he blitzed the most out of any defense in 2018. Number 1 in 2019. He blitzed the most in 2019. 2020, he blitzed the most out of all NFL defenses. 3 straight years of blitzing the most in the NFL. 2021, he dropped down to 6. That defense dropped down to 6. A lot of that had to do with injuries, and I gave, and I will still give, Don Martindale a lot of credit for adjusting his defense in the wake of the injuries that he suffered and that unit suffered. Because if he had continued down that path, the Ravens, I don't know if they even win 6 games. Because, they started off very aggressive. The Ravens, with the injuries that they had, they couldn't blitz as much. You cannot leave guys like Robert Jackson or Darryl Worley or whoever the heck is out there. You can't leave them on an island. You can trust Marlon Humphrey out there. You can trust Marcus Peters out there on islands. But the way that the Ravens adjusted that and said, all right, we're going to not blitz as much, I give Don Martindale a lot of credit. But just that part of it was not great. And the sacks have been an issue for years now. And I think that this will be a good thing for the Ravens defense in the long run. Now, some of the stuff that Don Martindale did really well was getting the most out of his players and adjusting on the fly. For the most part, there were situations where he did not adjust. But I think he did a good job in other situations. I will not miss I won't I will not miss Pernell McPhee dropping into coverage. I will not miss Justin Houston dropping into coverage. That's stuff that I don't think they'll miss either. I don't know. I feel like, there were some situations where Don Martindale got so caught up in the whole player versatility thing where it came back to be too much. And I appreciate what he did in that scenario, in those scenarios. I'm not saying that was a bad part of what he did, but the days of seeing Pernell McPhee on Tyreek Hill, hopefully those are gone with Martindale. And if the Ravens go back to more of a traditional defense where they're not, sending all these exotic blitzes or dropping defensive linemen into coverage, maybe that's what they need right now. Because usually, right, the guys who are the edge rushers and the defensive linemen and whatnot, those are the guys who generally have the most success with the pass rush moves, getting them off. The Ravens were great at sending safety blitzes off the edge and corner blitzes off the edge. Deshaun Elliott, Tavon Young, those were two of the guys who did a really, really good job at, getting that. And when Don Martindale got that simulated press, it was good when that happened. So what the Ravens now look to is they look for their new defensive coordinator or somebody who will still, this isn't going to be, I don't think, a huge overhaul. Now, the way I'll say it is an overhaul is if the personnel changes significantly, which is actually there is a decent possibility of that happening because of contracts, of free agents, and regardless of if Martindale stayed or went, there would have been a huge overhaul anyway of personnel. The scheme that this new defensive coordinator, whoever it is, comes in and lays out is going to largely depend on who the Ravens have with the personnel. But I would expect more sacks coming. I'm hoping at least. I'd expect less exotic blitzes. Martindale is a brilliant defensive mind. He's somebody who understands the game. He had these highly successful defenses for a reason. I don't think it was necessarily the wrong move. The timing, again, was a little bit shocking to me, but the Ravens wanted to get this started early, and some of the stuff that a few people reported was the fact that the Ravens wanted to get a head start. And if the Ravens didn't want what Martindale or didn't like what Martindale brought to the table in 2021 or in 2022, excuse me, there wouldn't have been an extension offered. And then the Ravens would have just been in a kind of a hard place. And, Martindale would have been in a hard place. So the Ravens and Martindale, I think, just out of respect for each other, decided this was the right time to do it. And now the Ravens have an opportunity to get better. They'll have to replicate some of the great things Martindale brought, which were plenty. But I think if they can get the sack thing down, that will be the key thing in generating pressure without blitzing. I've said it time and time again. Hopefully we'll get that here as the Ravens move in to what really could be a new defensive era for the team. We'll head into our final break here, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into some internal and external candidates for the Ravens' vacant defensive coordinator position. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Hey, Ravens fans. This is Kevin Oestreicher with Incredible App everyone who buys gas needs to know about and get upside. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code TOUCHDOWN and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price of the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code TOUCHDOWN. We return our final segment here of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Monday, January 24th. And we're talking about Don Martindale. The big news again, Ravens parting ways with their 4-year defensive coordinator. The Ravens have an opening at their defensive coordinator position, and there are plenty of candidates to replace him. Now, again, historically, the Ravens do hire internally for their coordinator positions. It's very rare they go from outside the organization for things like these. And I think it's just a matter of trust, right? Like the internal candidates have an idea of what it takes to be a Raven, play like a Raven, some of the things they say, the ability that the players on the team have, what schematic things the organization is looking for in general. I'm not saying outside candidates can't adapt to that and understand that, but I think that's part of the reason why. So we'll start with internal guys. We'll then go outside the organization, look at a few as well. Internally, I think there are really 4 realistic options, with 3 of them being guys who really have a shot, and then 2 of them being the main front runners. So I'll go in order. I think the number 1 guy for me who is the top internal candidate is Chris Hewitt, the secondary coach and the pass game coordinator. He is somebody who I think the organization thinks very highly of. And with the success that the secondary has had over the last couple of seasons, obviously not so much this year, but with that success, I think that Hewitt could be a prime candidate to be the new defensive coordinator. He's somebody who, even before Martindale was parted ways with, I think that I was saying Hewitt for many months is the guy who I think could be the replacement for Martindale at the end of the day. So, we'll kind of keep an eye on Hewitt and see what happens with him. The number 2 guy is Anthony Weaver. He just finished his first year as a Ravens coach, not as a Raven in the organization. He played with the team, was drafted by the team in the early 2000s. So he is familiar with the Raven way and being a part of this organization. The defensive line coach, he was somebody who was part of orchestrating the best run defense in the NFL. He has play calling experience. He was the defensive coordinator in Houston in 2020. That defense didn't get results, at least not the results he wanted, but that defense also wasn't as talented as the defense in Baltimore. So that's another guy who I think could be a prime candidate. Number 3, I'd say Drew Wilkins, the outside linebackers coach. He is loved. He is loved in the Ravens organization. He's actually going to be the defensive coordinator for the East team in the East-West Shrine Bowl game. And so he's somebody who, is an up-and-coming guy, but I think could really make an impact if he is chosen. Number 4 is Rob Ryan. This is somebody who I don't think is going to be the choice, but he does have play calling experience, although his defenses have not been spectacular over his time at the NFL level. But again, if the organization values play calling, then it could be Weaver and Ryan. If the organization wants an up-and-comer, maybe it's Hewitt or Wilkins. Weaver also kind of falls in that category too. So I'm looking at those 4 as internal guys. If I am predicting, I think it will probably be Hewitt or Weaver from the internal candidates. That's just where I am in terms of my predictions. But, they could go in a completely different direction that nobody's expecting them to, and that could come on the outside. Now, there was an article put out, I think it was by Peter King, and he said that if Mike Macdonald didn't leave the Ravens, he would have been the choice to replace Don Martindale when that time came. Well, the time is here, and Mike Macdonald is not in a Baltimore uniform. Well, not a uniform, not in a Baltimore shirt or whatever he wears to the games, because he is the defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan with current Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh. And Michigan, obviously, for those who follow along with college football, had a great year, made it to the college football playoffs. And he was a key proponent of that defense and what they were able to do. Macdonald knows this organization. The Ravens have reportedly been in contact with him from stuff that has been seen on Twitter. So maybe he is the guy, and he would be my top choice, at least from a guy who has been with the organization and understands what that is, because obviously from that article that was put out, it seemed like Macdonald was going to be the choice. Now, another guy who's interesting is Brian Flores. Flores being the former head coach of the Miami Dolphins, who had success there, but it just wasn't enough for that regime. They let him go. The issue with Flores is that if Flores was to come to Baltimore as a defensive coordinator, I'm very confident he'd be a one and done, and he'd get a head coaching job somewhere else. He should be a head coach now. He should still be the head coach of the Dolphins. The firing was ridiculous. It was ridiculous that he was fired in the first place, and I think he deserves a head coaching job for sure. But hey, you know what? If Brian Flores wants to come to Baltimore, that's okay with me. I said Mike there because the next guy on my mind is former Vikings coach Mike Zimmer. Zimmer's somebody who obviously his head coaching tenure in Minnesota didn't turn out the best. Had a couple of disappointing playoff finishes, didn't make the playoffs this past year. It seems like he's somebody who could just be better as a coordinator than as a head coach, and maybe that's somebody that the Ravens might want to look to. I've seen stuff about Rex Ryan out there. I don't think that's going to happen. Same thing with Ed Reed. I know the story's great. Like, he's talked about wanting to be a defensive coordinator, but again, I just don't see it. I think the 2 most realistic options are probably Macdonald and I'll say Zimmer. Flores could be, but I think he gets a head coaching job. That's why I don't think that's as realistic as maybe a Zimmer, who could be looking to rebound as a coordinator for a couple of seasons. And he's somebody who has had success on a defensive level. as a coordinator, and that could be somebody. But I think the Ravens, if they were to go outside, they would go with a guy who technically is outside, but really was more of an internal guy in Mike Macdonald. And maybe Macdonald wants to make the jump back to the NFL, knowing that there is a defensive coordinator position waiting for him if he wants to take it. That's somebody who I would be more than happy if he was the guy. The Ravens also requesting an interview with the Cowboys secondary coach, and that's somebody, and I think that could be a decently good hire. And so pulling up the actual stats for the Cowboys and what they were able to do from at least a pass defense perspective, Joe Witt ended up giving this team kind of a mediocre year from a pass defense perspective. Now, Witt isn't on the field with them, obviously, but the Cowboys finished 20th in total yards allowed and 16th in net yards per attempt. So, there are some issues there, but Trevon Diggs had 11 interceptions. And overall, people think, or at least seem to think, that he is coordinator ready. So potentially he is a guy who could be there. So Joe Witt, the Cowboys secondary coach, is another option. Very interesting choice. I think that for what the Cowboys were able to do, I mean, their defense was dominant, especially over the early part of the year. They kind of, didn't fall off a cliff, but they weren't as good in the second half of the season. But yeah, there are a lot of options for this coordinator position. The Ravens moving on from Don Martindale. It's going to be a big turning point. This is a big offseason for the Ravens. They have started it with a bang, and over the coming days, coming weeks, it'll be interesting to see if the Ravens do decide to go with their internal route or they look externally to fill the vacancy. That's all I have for you today here, though, on Locked On Ravens. Usually, this would be our second installment of the 2021 season review series. We'd talk about week 7 through 12, but this news was just too big not to talk about. So we'll do that tomorrow on our Tuesday show. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.